Yes, this is the session. Why you should migrate to ESXi with vSphere 4.0. My name is Alberto Faronato. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager for vSphere. And I have here a colleague of mine, Charu Chobo, a Senior Technical Marketing Manager, as well as Travis Goodfellow, a customer of ours from Medtronic. We're going to go over the ESXi topic today. And Travis is going to share his experience in using ESXi and the good things about it. So I'm going to just start. First of all, always disclaimers from the legal guys, but I'm not going to go over this. We have a fairly packed agenda, so I want to keep it tight and leave as many minutes as possible at the end for Q&A. This is a very important topic for our customers, and so I'd like to hear from you directly. So first of all, how many here are using ESX today? Pretty much everybody. Excellent. And how about ESXi? How many here are already using it? About half. Of the guys, of the people who are using ESX but not ESXi, how many of you are planning to transition to ESXi next year? Oh, pretty good number. Excellent. That's a good idea, especially given the... Well, for the next year you do. For the next year or so you do. So, but I also want to say that, as many of you know about the announcement, this doesn't mean that we will stop supporting ESX. We have a fairly long support policy for ESX, so we're not going to totally abandon ESX from the day we'll ship the next version of vSphere. So keep that in mind. The first thing I want to touch upon is there's a lot of confusion out there, and I think we did our best job possible to create as many names as possible and confuse everything, but we're trying to streamline it a little bit. So the first thing I want to touch upon is what are the main components of the platform, and what is the difference between vSphere, ESX, and ESXi. There are mainly two components in the VMware virtualization platform. The first component is clearly vSphere, and it's the software that you install on your hosts to run your virtual machine. The second component is VMware vCenter server. That's the management software. You really need the vCenter component to be able to do things such as vMotion, HA, DRS, and other things. So it's not something that you really can't avoid, besides the main function of doing centralized management. vSphere comes in many editions, right, from the lower end, cheapest edition, vSphere Essentials, up to the most complete feature-rich and more expensive VMware Enterprise Plus, vSphere Enterprise Plus. Any of these editions can be deployed in two ways, either with the ESXi Hypervisor architecture or the ESX Hypervisor architecture. I want to stress one point, very important point, and this is something that we want to make sure that everyone understands, for the reason that in the past we used to have a free product called ESXi Single Server, also known as free ESXi, and that led to the belief that ESXi is not as feature-rich or as capable as ESX. That's a very wrong statement. ESXi is actually at feature parity with ESX, provides the same capability in terms of consolidation ratios, in terms of performance, and in terms of being able to support any of the use cases that you can run with various vSphere editions. So totally an enterprise production-ready hypervisor architecture. If you look at the history of our hypervisor architectures, ESXi is pretty much the third generation. It's the latest, by far the most advanced hypervisor architecture in the market today. We'll talk a little bit more in details of why that's the case. It was first released in 2007, and it followed two previous generations. The first one was VMware GSX, also known as VMware Server today. GSX was a hosted hypervisor, so it ran on top of a operating system that it leveraged to do resource management in practice. That architecture was good at the beginning. It clearly didn't have enough capability and scalability for running multiple virtual machines in production environments. So we moved to a bare metal hypervisor architecture in 2003 with VMware ESX. There are pretty much two components of the ESX architecture. One is the VM kernel that is responsible for running all the virtualization services and effectively allow you to run virtual machines. The second component is the service console. The service console is a management partition based on a Linux operating system that is used for local management tasks. With ESXi, we got rid of the service consoles, and we streamlined the hypervisor architecture down to only the VM kernel. And this allowed us to build the thinnest architecture for a hypervisor in the marketplace, an architecture that is totally independent from a general purpose operating system to run your virtual machines. The architecture is purpose designed to run virtual machines and virtual machines only. You don't need your browser in your hosts to be able to run virtual machines. So we took away all the stuff that you really didn't need and made it a much slimmer, more secure, more reliable platform. So let's dive a little deeper into what are the differences between ESX and ESXi. On the left hand, you see the ESX architecture with the two main components that we just talked about, the VM kernel and the service console. The service console is used to run scripts or also to leverage agents to integrate with management monitoring products or system management products or other things like backup products, right? You install their agents in the service console to integrate with third-party products. It also contains VMware management API, VMware management agents. When we got rid of the service console with ESXi, we moved most of the functions that these agents and other third-party code directly into the VM kernel, transforming them into making those services available through APIs. So there are a number of APIs that will allow you to integrate with backup products or management products, as well as the VMware APIs to integrate with vCenter. The good thing about this is that first of all, the code-based disk footprint of the hypervisor is reduced from about 2 gigabytes, most of which comes from the service console, down to just less than 100 megabytes. So a much smaller footprint, much fewer code lines. And this is good because, as you probably would agree with, the less is the code, the lower the likelihood that there are bugs or the possibility of having security breaches, because it's much easier to protect. The other good aspect of the ESXi architecture is that it really enables you to deploy an agentless management paradigm, right? So instead of having to manage several agents on each deployment of ESX, you now can plug in directly the hypervisor and get all your information or your management tasks done that way, which is a much more streamlined and efficient way to do it. The last point of the reason why we moved to an ESXi architecture is that in the ESXi architecture, there isn't really any arbitrary code going into the hypervisor. Every module that gets added to the ESXi to integrate with other management products or backup products has been certified by both the third-party vendor and VMware. So it's very secure and very stable code. We're not really the only ones who are saying that a thinner architecture for the hypervisor is better. This is a chart that we took from a recent blog that was posted by a Gartner analyst around why a thinner architecture for the hypervisor is better. And you can clearly see how the Gartner points at security as one of the key aspects or the key benefits of a slim architecture, as well as other things that you can read in this blog post. I'm going to now turn it over to Charu, who's going to tell you a little bit more in details how management changes between ESX and ESXi.
Okay. Thank you, Alberto. So this diagram here sort of presents a summary of how management changes when you go from ESX to ESXi. So what you see on the left here is the service console in the classic architecture is a place where we've kind of collected functionality over the years. It's mainly used for the four purposes that you see there. One is for running management agents. So these are things that you use to manage your actual VM inventory and things like backup, for example. Those are typically done by agents that run in the service console. The second would be hardware agents, agents that monitor the hardware, the status of the hardware that's there. The third piece is around running commands for configuration diagnostics. Pretty much anytime you needed to do something where you had to run a command, it was log into the service console and issue that command. The last piece there is these, what I'm calling infrastructure service agents. So these are agents that are used to integrate the host with the rest of your environment. Things like NTP for time service, maybe syslog, SNMP, etc., things like that. Not things that are necessary for virtualization, per se, not for running the guests, but for actually integrating in your environment. And the answer is, the reason for this is that it's pretty clear. When we first came out with ESX way back when, we needed a management interface. Linux was around, so we used Red Hat Linux as a service console. And that's where things were basically thrown in. But over the years, as we've advanced, we've been able to add more capability to the actual native part of the ESX, the VM kernel, while still maintaining a pretty small and slim footprint. And as a result, on the right, you see what we've done with the ESXi architecture is that we've broken out a lot of that to make it run off the box, to have remote type of management capabilities. So you'll see that we have, for doing management, we have things, agentless methods based upon the vSphere API and other APIs, such as the backup APIs. For doing hardware monitoring, we have this SIM framework, which I'll talk about briefly, which basically lets you do hardware monitoring from outside the box by making sure you have small components that are running in the kernel that provide the hardware information to some external entity. Next, around configuration diagnostics, we created a set of remote command line interfaces. Primary ones being vCLI, vSphere CLI, which is kind of familiar to you if you're used to the service console scripting. It's kind of more of a Unixy type of command line interface. And then we have Power CLI, which is the one that's based on PowerShell. So you can do all of your configuration configuration type of commands, as well as a lot of your diagnostic commands using those two command line environments. But if you need to do some lower level diagnostics and troubleshooting, we do have local support consoles that we've added. In local support console, by definition, it's locally on the box. You'll see that that's where you would then go drop down into the box itself, access the box directly, and run those different kinds of commands. Otherwise, what's running on the box, the main thing is, in addition to support for those APIs that we've added, is these native agents. So I talked about these infrastructure service agents. Those are the pieces that we now need to run natively on the box. So anything to do with, as I mentioned, NTP, syslog, etc. We've now created native agents to provide those capabilities. And so one of the main goals of doing all this was to really stop having customers to worry about individual boxes, individual servers, and take a step back and think about managing the cloud as a whole. So manage your entire environment. Stop worrying about individual servers to the extent possible. And with these API and remote CLI kind of capabilities, you can now do mass operations quite easily. And so that's the whole point. You stop thinking about managing individual servers, start more thinking about managing entire clusters. So the SIM framework, some of you might be familiar with this, but SIM stands for Common Information Model, and it's a way of doing hardware monitoring without an agent. What you basically have is on the ESX host itself, you have small components running which are called providers. These providers run in the kernel, and they'll read the hardware information and provide it up to what's called a broker, a SIM broker, which then aggregates all the different provider information and exports it to the outside world, exposes it to the outside world, using standard APIs, such as WSMan, which is Web Services for Management. So what this means is that any client out there that's capable of reading this API can then get the hardware information. There are commercial tools that do this, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you can even download simple command line clients that will read SIM information via WSMan. One thing to note is that both VMware and our hardware partners come up with these providers. So when you get an ESXi download, it'll typically contain providers that we have, as well as some that our hardware partners have provided right in there. In addition, you can add in more providers, third-party providers, depending on the specific hardware that you're running. So that's kind of something important that you need to be concerned with. So for example, if you're running certain server models, such as HP, Dell, or IBM, you can get customized versions of ESXi which contain the providers specific to those pieces of those particular server models. So that's something that you would want to do. We have been providing customized images on our website. In the past, some of these OEMs have provided them on their website. So you need to check back to the at our website to see where the current source of the most up-to-date image is. But the important thing is that when you're using a particular server model, check to see if there is a customized flavor of ESXi for it. Once you do that, you'll see that when you use a commercial tool, it will actually use that SIM information to provide hardware monitoring. So, for example, Dell Open Managed Server Administrator 6.1 and later can read the SIM information from ESXi. So, you can basically go when you download that version, look up in the documentation for it, and you'll see how to attach it, connect it to ESXi, and get the hardware information. Same thing with HP System Insight Manager 5.3.2 and greater. You can get that information. Those are two tools that are capable of reading this information from ESXi. A third tool actually is vCenter Server itself. vCenter Server is now actually, well, has been for a while, it's capable of reading the hardware information from ESXi using the SIM interface. So it provides you with detailed hardware health monitoring right in the UI client, the vSphere client itself. So not only can you see the virtual health of your environment, the virtual hosts and things like that, but you can get an idea of the physical health of your servers as well, all within vCenter Server. In addition, we've integrated the alarms and alert system in vCenter Server with this hardware information so that you can have alarms that get fired off by certain hardware events. For example, the fan status going bad, or the power supply going bad, or the temperature going high, things like that. And you might be familiar with the vCenter alarms and alert system. You can actually have those alarms then trigger certain actions. So, for example, if the temperature on a host is rising too high, you could just automatically put that host into maintenance mode, evacuate all the VMs, so that you can safely take care of them before the host fails. So things like that are possible with this integration between the hardware health monitoring and the vCenter alarms and alerts. In terms of management and backup, the majority of vendors today actually do support ESXi. What you see on the screen is a kind of a large list, but it's only a partial list of software companies that do support ESXi today. The important thing to understand, though, is that some companies have products that don't support ESXi in their older versions. So maybe you're running a product that doesn't support ESXi. Odds are, if you move to the later version of that software, it will support ESXi. So it's not 100%. There's still companies out there that don't support ESXi, but we've made a big strides in that area in the past year and a half, and most of them do support ESXi today, and the ones that don't, they've clearly gotten the message, and they're going to be adding ESXi support hopefully in the next year. So what's new in ESXi 4.1? Kind of what I've talked about now has been sort of what's been there with ESXi, a little bit with 3.5, but really also in 4.0. But now with vSphere 4.1 out, there's actually some significant new capabilities that are there in 4.1 that we can talk about. So this big chart here is kind of a lot to take in, but it kind of shows various capabilities and how they are supported or not supported in ESXi 4.0 and ESXi 4.1, and in addition, how it compares with the classic ESX 4.1, which, as you know, has released with vSphere 4.1 also. So if you're looking down this list, there's a lot that I'm not going to be able to cover all this. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about some of these in the next few slides before handing it over to Travis. But the main things I'm going to call out are as follows. The Active Directory integration, I'm going to go into more detail about that. And then this notion of doing scripted installation. But otherwise, what you'll basically see is from the last two columns is that ESXi and ESX 4.1, they're basically at parity. The capabilities that you find in ESX 4.1 by and large are available in ESXi 4.1. So for Active Directory service, this is something that a lot of customers had been asking for that we now finally added in ESXi 4.1. What this means is that anytime you log in directly to the box, meaning that you access it using the vSphere client, or you run a script using PowerCLI or vCLI directly to the box instead of going through vCenter server, anytime you do that, you do need to provide credentials. So in the past, what you had to do is create a local account on every ESXi host individually, and that has its own individual username and password that's totally separate. But now, that's not scalable, of course, and for security reasons, it's better to have it all in one place. So this is why we added the Active Directory integration. So now what this means is that you can actually take your ESXi host, join it to an Active Directory domain, and then when you try to access the box directly, you can provide credentials of a user in Active Directory, and ESXi will automatically check with Active Directory to make sure that you are who you are before proceeding. So now one thing to keep in mind is that just because you have a user account in Active Directory, it doesn't mean that you can automatically go in and administer the box. Otherwise, your entire company could do that. There is the notion of being able to have roles and privileges for every user. So by default, nobody actually has the privilege or permission to manage a box. You actually have to go in and specifically give them that permission to manage the box, to administer it. One thing you may or may not know is that you can have varying levels of privilege on an ESXi host. It's not just all or nothing. Either you're administrator or you have no privileges. You can have different roles with different capabilities. We have a couple of built-in roles. One is full administrator, one is read-only. But you can also create custom roles if you want. And so what you can do is then grant these administrative privileges to certain Active Directory users or Active Directory groups. So that way you can say, well, if you're a member of a certain Active Directory group, you get administrative privileges. If you're a member of another Active Directory group, you get only read-only privileges. The other option here is around deployment, large-scale installation, large-scale deployment. So we actually have quite a range of capabilities here in terms of how you can do installation. One thing we've added now with 4.1 is the support for a PXE-based installation, so network installation. So you can actually, typically when you've installed ESXi in the past, you might have put in a CD or a DVD and run the installer off of that. Well, with PXE-based installation, you don't have to do that. You can actually go to the console of a host and tell it to do a PXE boot and load the image over the network. So that's a kind of an alternate way of having a centralized golden image. And this is something that people who are manage large-scale environments with classic ESX might be used to doing. But you don't have to do it just interactively. We've also added the ability to do scripted installation. So with scripted, that basically means that you can script that entire process of booting off the network, basically installing the image from off a remote repository on the network, and then configuring it so that it's fully up and running and configured at the end of the process. So this is something that you can have fully scripted. And there's various choices here. You can actually have the PXE on your host, get the installer from different places. The installer is the code that actually does the installation of the image. You can have the image itself live in different places. And then you can have the configuration script, which sets the personality of the server, essentially, in different places as well, either on the network. And then finally, you can also do scripting, post-install kind of scripting. So you can have your main configuration script fire off other scripts for doing configuration. So you can actually have a fully configured host by the time the process ends as well. The other installation option we have is boot from SAN. Boot from SAN was only experimentally supported in ESXi 4.0. It's now fully supported in 4.1. And with that, you can actually boot your image off a SAN device. It works with SAN, iSCSI, as well as fiber channel over Ethernet. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you have to have HBAs or network cards that are supported for this purpose. Different ones are qualified for this purpose, and others are not. So you would need to check with our HCL or hardware compatibility list to make sure that the version that you have does work with boot from SAN. So you can check on our website for that. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Travis Goodfellow, who is one of our customers who've been using ESXi for a long time, and he's going to talk to us about his experiences with it. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning. Just by a show of hands, how many people is this their first VMworld? This is my first VMworld too, so here I am presenting 9 o'clock, and I thought, when they asked me to speak that I might be speaking on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, but no, Monday morning I don't get to see any other presentations. I just got thrown right into the fire. My name is Travis Goodfellow, and I work at Medtronic. I've been there for the past 7 years, working with ESX for the last 6 years. And Medtronic made the decision to move to ESXi about 2 years ago, wholesale. As much as we could. We moved about 90% of our host over there. There was some issues where we had with some older hardware that wasn't on the HCL. There was some issues with some compatibility with some VMware software, like Lab Manager. But for the most part, we moved everything over there about 2 years ago. And we started running some stuff about 2.5 years ago. So we've been running it for quite a while now. This is just a basic overview of Medtronic, and I put this up on the screen to really illustrate why the decision-making process that we use to go about to go from the Service Console to ESXi, and it's really the way our company is laid out. We're a very global company that's dispersed, and we have a lot of employees in a lot of locations and data centers in a lot of locations. So what does Medtronic do? Medtronic is a medical device manufacturer, and we basically manufacture devices that alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And you probably know somebody, or you have a device yourself that has a stent, a pacemaker, defibrillator, diabetes pump, or spinal or bone product. Those are all of our business units. And I actually work for Shared Services IT, and some of our business units have moved over, some haven't, but Shared Services IT represents the bulk, the largest part of our IT organization. And we have 18 locations where we've deployed ESXi clusters throughout the world, in Asia Pac, North America, and Europe. And Singapore and Sydney are probably the furthest away from Minneapolis, where our headquarters is. And they're all being managed by really one virtual center server, and then we have a second virtual center server for DR. And that was really a driver to go to ESXi, was be able to eliminate our virtual center servers. We originally had virtual center servers in a lot of locations, and the reason why we had that is because we wanted to leverage VUM, and VUM just did not work well and scale over WAN links. So if you notice our server virtualization percentages, in 2007 to 2008, we jumped from 8 to 25%, and we've had some great growth since then. In 2008, that was the year that we adopted ESXi as our standard. The SIM providers originally in 3.5 weren't the best, and I put this 80% blade, 20% rack mount graph to illustrate that we really relied on some of the blade management features between HP and Dell to help fill in some of the gaps until those SIM providers really matured. So I talked about VUM and how it allowed us to patch, and we were able to reduce our virtual servers in our environment, but also it allowed us to reduce not only our capital costs, but some of our OpEx costs, where we've taken our install and config of ESXi, where it was in our engineering team, and we moved it over to our ops team. We had some new hires that we hired right out of college. We hired somebody and promoted them from the support center, and within 3 weeks of being on our team, we had them installing and configuring ESXi, where we could never really do that with the Service Console. It was just too complicated. The DCUI is a fairly menu-driven, put in a name, put in an IP, put in some DNS. If you want to do some troubleshooting, it's very simple. You can test your network. You can restart your network, restart your management agents. There's some logs you can view. It's really a great interface for operations teams to take those basic troubleshooting steps before they get promoted up into the higher level teams. Now, I need to take a time out here, and if you've ever given a presentation, you have to get your presentation blessed by your legal department. My legal department had some issues with this slide, so they wanted me to state that Medtronic does not imply a warranty about the security and reliability of ESXi. So, like what was discussed earlier, is really there's less code, and that code's more trusted. We feel like it's a more secure solution, and that's one of the reasons why we went to it. This is a graph, and it's sort of fuzzy, but the green represents the number of patches in the Service Console, and this is all on 3.5, and the blue or purple represents the number of patches in ESXi. And the one on your far left would be the security. So you can see that the security patches, I think it was 44 with ESX traditional Service Console, and 9 with I. So the security, just from this graph, you can tell is much better. So we had to change the way that we did things. We couldn't do things the way we did them before. And so some of the things that we used were the SIM providers. We integrated into our Dell Open Manage, and we relied heavily on some chassis management because we were heavily deployed on blades and our iDRAC and ILOs. And I put a link here for the SIM providers that you can download from Dell and inject into your hypervisor. So another thing that we did was we relied heavily on plugins from our storage vendors. We're a strong NetApp and EMC shop, and on the NetApp side, they suggest that you run the host utility kit and to set the preferred path. There was really no solution at the time when I came out, so it was a very manual process. You could script it. There were some third-party tools that you could buy that did it at the time. But now they have a plug-in, so does EMC, in the Virtual Center that takes care of a lot of that for you, those configuration items and the preferred pathing. And then ALUA is very important. I think since 4.0, ESX supports ALUA, and most storage frames do now. If yours doesn't, check with your storage admin and make sure that you get upgraded. But this is key to have when you go to ESXi. So we started relying heavily on PowerShell, and PowerShell allows us to do a lot of things. A lot of our post-build operations, and then just some health checks and some validations of our configurations. There's a lot you can do with PowerShell, and I put some links up here. Power GUI, virtualization, EcoShell. There's something called Project Onyx that started on labs.vmware.com that now got moved to the community site. But that is basically anything you do in Virtual Center, you can you open this Project Onyx code, and it basically goes out there, and everything that you're doing is copying and builds a PowerShell script of all the things that you're doing in Virtual Center. So it's very powerful to be able to do something once and then be able to repeat your process. The other thing is the vCLI, which is more of a Perl Linux-based command line interface. And there's some things that you just can't do in PowerShell that you have to do in the vCLI. And the Vima is a virtual appliance. If you aren't using it today, you can use it with either the Service Console or ESXi. So I encourage people to download it and start using it. There's a lot of different things it can do. One of the important things, if you're running 4.0 or below, is the remote log collection. Before 4.1, the host did not save the logs if you did a reboot. So if you had some sort of issue and your host crashed or you had to reboot it, and then you called VMware support and they said, send me the logs, well, your logs were cleared after the reboot. So it was important to have a Vima server or syslog server set up to do the remote log collection. But the Vima will allow you to do remote ESX top, and it also allows you to insert your customized hardware agents from the appliance. I think that's all we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. So wrapping up a little bit here, want to summarize the key things we went over about ESXi and the key benefits. First point is ESXi is a fully featured hypervisor architecture, provides the same consolidation capability as well as performance capabilities of the ESX architecture. As we discussed along the presentation, it comes with several benefits. First and foremost is more security and higher security and higher reliability, thanks to the fact that it doesn't depend on a general purpose operating system. The second key aspect and benefit is that it provides a way for streamlining deployment and configuration. It's much simpler to configure, it requires less time, and it makes available both vCLI and PowerCLI for scripting. Last bullet is about patching and updating. Thanks to the smaller disk footprint, smaller code base, it requires fewer patches, and it also makes available a much more efficient way of patching the hypervisor. One that eliminates patch drifting, because you can now reapply the entire image since it's a very small image in itself. It also has support for a dual image approach that lets you revert back to a previous image directly from by just using a keystroke at the boot time, in case the new image you deployed didn't work as you expected. So it's very safe from that point of view. And last but not least, we talked about the hardware components and integration components. Those components can also be updated independently from the VM kernel. So a lot of flexibility there. With respect to planning your transition to ESXi, we really encourage you to start testing ESXi if you're not familiar with it yet. You can either redeploy existing vSphere licenses using the ESXi architecture, or use our 60 days evaluation for vSphere and deploy it with the ESXi architecture. The second thing you want to do is to familiarize yourself with PowerCLI and vCLI. You can start doing that directly with ESX and apply the lessons learned there to ESXi. Third thing, you want to check with your vendors on backup and system management, and see if they support ESXi. As Charu said, most likely in the latest version of their products they do. So make sure that that's the case. And last but not least, you should try to plan your transition to ESXi with your upgrade to vSphere 4.1. 4.1 provides ESXi 4.1 provides a lot more capabilities and functionalities than 4.0, especially from a management standpoint, which I think are really important. You should be taking advantage of. So this is the call to action. ESXi is the recommended deployment option from VMware, so you should start deploying as many hosts as possible using ESXi. Going forward, as we discussed at the beginning, our vSphere versions will only be based on ESXi. So vSphere 4.1 is the last vSphere version that will provide both the ESX and the ESXi architecture. The next release will only provide the ESXi option. Yes, you can have mixed clusters. Yes. I want to provide and keep here while we do a little bit of a Q&A, a long list of resources that are available both at the conference and after the conference for you to learn more about ESXi. On our website, there is an info center section that is fully dedicated on explaining the differences and between ESX and ESXi and things you wanna dig into and learn more about ESXi. We have classes from our education services. We're planning to make those classes. Right now, they're available only, in person in class. So they're pretty in depth, but we want to extend that with online classes as well. You can join the ESXi community through our community website. Again, download the free 60-day evaluation. And you see here the long list of sections. This one's clearly almost done, but we have other sessions here at the conference that focus on ESXi that you should plan to attend if you have time. We also have labs that are specifically designed for ESXi. And you can stop by at the booth on the VMware Express. We have a pod where we can talk to and show you some of the new features. In September, there's a book coming out, fairly detailed book. There was also technical edited by Charu, and it will provide a very detailed overview of ESXi and the full capabilities of the hypervisor. So I'm going to roll back to this slide and open it up for questions if there are any. Yes?
Travis, you mentioned that you had some problems with consolidating your ESXi deployment across the whole different ROM. Is that mainly because you have problems pushing patches across lane links? The ESXi works better with many patches?
Yeah, so the question was, I mentioned earlier that I had issues with VUM and the service console. And yes, where ESXi excelled is it only pushed a 32 meg file to each host instead of hundreds of megs, maybe gigs at a time, especially when you're doing upgrades. So my WAN links couldn't accommodate that, and they can with I.
So we had another 15 minutes. Forgot. I was assuming that.
Correct. So I have one virtual center and one VUM. I also have one DR virtual center. And I have my DR host and my DR virtual center being managed by my DR VUM.
How many servers?
So I have about 600 sockets, and they're all mostly 2-socket systems, so roughly about 300 sockets.
There's a question back there.
They're mostly, in the U.S., they're pretty robust, but when we're going to Asia, they aren't that great. And into Cindy, I think we got a couple meg links, and I usually get about 200 milliseconds, like into Sydney.
Are they over satellite or are they?
No, I do not believe they're over satellite.
So, question here.
Yeah, since ESXi supports built-in SAN now, that means all the drivers have to be installed at the kernel for all the HDD cards.
That's something you'd have to check with the specific on the HCL to see if it's supported by ESXi or not.
Well, I mean, there's a list for ESX, and the new ESXi, does that support the same?
So with 4.1, we're qualifying both at the same time. With older versions, it might not be the same.
Question back there. I believe the PowerPoint will be available to you, but I don't know if it's already available.
Usually 2 weeks after the show,
so
all presentations will be available.
Question there.
The VMware symbol for BIOS upgrades, the way the Service Console is now?
What was the question?
I couldn't hear that.
VMware to do BIOS upgrades, the way you can't use the Service Console now.
Oh,
So-
the question is, can you use the VMA
For
to
the
do-
hardware, so no, you can't.
Right. You cannot use VMA to do BIOS updates.
But that's something that's a feature that I've actually requested, and it would be nice to be able to do that within Virtual Center and have it all be automated and put a cluster in maintenance mode. And so I think that's my wish list, and I don't know where that is on the VMware.
So I do know that the SIM framework is capable of doing BIOS updates, and it's a matter of getting the companies out there to start adding that functionality, and they have started adding that functionality. So over time,
UCS does it.
UCS and HP, I think, are two examples.
The latest version of HP's firmware maintenance CD is completely automated to pop in and update all the functions.
But you have to take the host down, right, and boot to that CD. Nirvana would be to have it all done from Virtual Center, have VUM manage everything, and have everything automated. That'd be Nirvana for me.
We'll note that. Any more questions?
64-bit support?
Yes.
You mentioned I understand that the ESXi 4.1 and more capability, but I heard that we have to wait and migrate our ESXi 4.0 based systems to ESXi 4.1 systems until update 1 is out. Can you please comment on that?
No, you don't have to. It's your choice whether you want to, but you could migrate today.
I've done it with upgraded from 4.0 ESXi
Exactly.
to 4.1 ESXi. Did update one year, no problem. It's about as easy as to reinstall. It's so small, it can take any time.
That's the route we will follow. I just heard some rumors that it will be better to wait until update 1.
Who's fostering this rumor?
You promised you won't do this.
I won't. But I'll talk to Tony, my cousin, and so take care of it. I just no, but I don't know. That's incorrect information. All right, so you can do it.
Although we're all going to be having to push your ESXi fairly soon, you were mentioning support for ESX, ESX 35441. How late is that going into the future? The reason I ask is because some of the companies with 10, 15,000,
Yeah.
20,000 virtual machines, although they want to get to that point,
Yeah.
like Wells Fargo, for instance, we want to get there, but what time it takes to
Yeah.
get there. How much is the support environment?
So if I'm not mistaken, it's about 7 years.
Yeah, there's
So it's pretty generous.
I think it's a 5-year full
2,
support,
yeah.
and then 2 years of extended support.
Yeah, I mean you have plenty
But
of
you
time.
have to be on the latest update.
So that's 5 years from July, right?
from the day we ship the new.
Which is like July 15th.
I can't tell you.
Okay.
That's one of the things our legal department doesn't want us to say. No problem. No more questions? Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.